All right. Can y'all see that, the lending timeline? Good. Okay. And if y'all have any questions, remember, feel free to jump in at any point. Okay, so lending timeline. So we're picking back up with where we left off on the last nuts and bolts, where we were kind of midway through talking about how to work with a lender and how to really help make sure that we're getting all the everything to our lender partner where we can really best work together. And so part of it is knowing the lending timeline, just so that that way we can have an understanding of who's kind of on first and who's responsible for what. Not that we have to know necessarily all of it, but so that we can help explain it to a client, so that when they're on the ledge, we can help be a partner to that lender to say, hey, nope, that's totally normal. This is where we are in the process, right? So starts off with the consumer calling the lender to get a pre-qual letter, right? So we know about that process. It's about 15 minutes on the phone, relatively easy, but they are going to need to get the lender enough information and permission to pull their credit. So they'll pull their credit, they'll do the pre-qual, and then once we have something under contract, then once we send that contract to the lender, then they can lock the interest rate. So a lot of times consumers think like, oh, they quoted me this and that's like the end all be all, that's going to be the rate. No, not really. Not until we get that under contract, then we lock. And so a lot of times I'll get from consumers like, well, I don't want to get a pre-qual with that lender because I may want to shop around or I may want to do something else. It's fine. What I encourage them to do is just go ahead and get a pre-qual with one lender, preferably mine. And then if they want to shop around for it after we get it under contract, they can do that. But at least we know from the very beginning that they are really pre-qualified. Because my concern is if they do it the other way and go with their lender to start, and then they go with their lender to start, and then after we contract come to one of my lenders, is that I will have already lost them to that other lender. And if that other lender missed something, like, oh, they forgot to ask them about, the child support that they're paying, or they forgot to ask about something like, then we've gone through this whole big process and missed out. And now my reputation is harmed because I'm making offers with a buyer that can't really qualify. Okay. Does that make sense? So that's why really I want them to be pre-qualified with my person so that we get in. But then when we get to this part, I'm like, yeah, if you want to lock interest rate somewhere else, totally cool. All right. So once they lock the interest rate, then they'll get a mess of disclosures. They used to come out in the mail. Now they come out electronically that they will need to sign to say, hey, yes, I am going to go with you, Mr. Lender, and lock my interest rate. Now, what happens if after they click the button and say, yes, I want to go with you and lock my interest rate, they decide to go to another lender? Anybody know? Not really anything, right? The lender can't force them to close with them. So if you have a client that locks somewhere and then they still want to move, they totally can. They can really move anywhere up until closing. So there's no pressure. And I always encourage a consumer to go ahead and lock. Don't play this game of like, oh, I'm going to wait and see what rates do and then I'll lock, because most lenders have what's called a float down option. So if I lock today and it's at 3 and then the rates fall to 2.5, most of the time the lender can float down to that 2.5 for me. But if rates are at 3 today and we go to war with South Korea and rates go to 4 tomorrow, they don't have any protection for me at the 3. Okay. So I'm always a fan of locking. Once they get those disclosures done, then they can order the appraisal. Most of my lender partners understand that I want to order appraisals very quickly. Traditionally, it had been where we would wait until after the option period and then order the appraisal. I don't love that because I want to make sure that that appraised number is good, right? And so most consumers do too. So I want to go ahead and order that appraisal as soon as they lock in the rate. That doesn't mean that we'll probably have it finished before the option period, but at least we'll get the process started. Because how long are y'all seeing as far as people needing time to do an appraisal right now? Y'all seen anything? So normally it's a 2-week process of getting the loan or of getting the appraisal done minimum. Right now with the weather and that kind of thing, we're going to see it stretched even longer because they're having to go and do rechecks on a lot of properties. So there's really no benefit to waiting. It really needs to be done quickly. Cool. All right. Then once the appraisal is in, it goes into processing. So up until this point, from pre-qual, contract, locking interest rate, getting the disclosure signed, and ordering the appraisal, all of that is being done still on the loan officer's desk. Okay. So that loan officer that they called initially, likely they've been the only one to see the file all this time until it goes down into processing. Now, it doesn't give me a whole lot of concern because we work with really good lenders that know what they're looking at. However, this is too, if they're working with somebody that we haven't worked with in the past, what happens if they miss something? Well, they were the only person who was looking at any of this up until this point. And so it's fairly easy for somebody to miss something at that. So that's too why I want to get the appraisal ordered as quickly as possible so that I can get that onto the processor's desk. Once the processor gets involved, and so the processor is a pretty junior kind of paper pusher type person, and it's not anything against them, that's their role in this. They are very important, but they are kind of junior people. And so they're going to take the file and prep it for underwriting. That's the whole point of what a processor does. So they're going to go through and verify employment. They're going to get letter, like written stuff from their employer to confirm what the bank statements and the paycheck stubs that they provided, that all of that's accurate. And they're also going to verify rent or verify mortgage. They're going to double check everything on the credit report. They're going to get any additional documents that underwriters might need. So they're going to ask for things like large deposits. They'll want verification of what large deposits were put in based on what's in the bank statements. They're gathering all of that because probably the loan officer didn't know to ask for it. Maybe the loan officer did ask for it, and now the processor is going back and asking for anything in addition. Then once it gets down to the underwriter might ask for things in addition too. So you'll hear consumers a lot of times get really frustrated of like, oh my gosh, like why didn't they just tell me everything up front for me to get them so that way I could not have to be constantly going back and getting one more thing. Well, part of that is by design. The loan officer is looking at it, asking for everything that he can think of that he would need. The processor is going through and making sure that there's not anything missing. And then we're getting down to the underwriter, which that's where really, that's our senior person. That is the go, no go decision. The underwriter is everything to this, right? So it goes through processing. Then the underwriter is going to have a list of things that they're going to go back to processing and say, hey, I understand you got us everything we thought we needed, but I actually also need this, this, and this. And that's just the process. So, I can't do anything to make that an easier process. Like that is just what consumers have to deal with. And I was on the phone, or Spencer had somebody on the phone just griping him out about it last week. And just like, I can't believe you sent me over to that SOB Mike Mills and like all this, like, he's just asking me for more and more and more. Like, and I'm, and Spencer's just like, look, this is not a Mike Mills issue. This is how it is. And that situation, that's where the money comes from. And so if we don't play by their rules, if we don't get them all this documentation, then we can't go forward. We can't get you the house. Like this is a very essential part. And so part of it is just backing up the lender, like I said, to say, yep, this is real. This is not something that's out of the norm. This is what we would have expected here. So just know there's kind of a circular issue in that underwriting to processing loan officer. That's where sometimes you'll see like, we thought we were going to get clear to close, but we didn't. We had to go back for more documentation, and then we've got to go back through that process again. Anybody have any questions on that or what you've had to deal with in the past? Okay.
I tell my clients, especially if they're first time home buyer, the process like that. And I tell them like, when everything gets going, they're going to come back to you with a laundry list of, we need this, 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 this. And I said, the faster you can get that turned into them, I go, be on top of that. If you can get it to them the next day, do it. because everything that they send back into underwriting and they go through, if they need more, they're going to ask for more. And I said, don't take it as anything other than I just need to get these things in so that I can get my home.
Yep.
And that's pretty much how I present it to them. It's pretty layman's term, but it's.
Yeah.
I said the easier you make it on your lender, the faster you can get this process done and then we don't have any hiccups when it comes time for closing.
I love it. And it really is. I mean, when you think about it and like really look at, you know, mortgages across the United States and why this is so important, it really is. This is an important part. Like we're doing parts of our economy to make sure that lenders are not over lending on a house where then we're going to have a failure of our mortgage system because they've overspent and we've got issues. We're not going to have situations where people are using drug money to come in and buy properties and don't really have a job to support. And so they're more nefarious in their income streams and it's not supported. So there are reasons why all this, it's just tough for a consumer to see because they just want it to be over. They don't want to deal with it all. Right. Okay. So we're looking for that clear to close. Usually the CD is issued within that 3 days. So if y'all haven't been in the business for a long time, HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban, I don't know, what is that? Housing and Urban Development. They are the ones that come up with this system. And so CDs are a relatively new thing. Like we've only had CDs about 3 years. And so we've had loan disclosures and CDs. It's just something that the client may not have a lot of knowledge about because they haven't used that language before. So you may hear people talking about HUDs or good faith estimates. That's what our loan disclosure and our closing disclosure were. So it'll change again. So it's just part of it. It's just kind of knowing the language on it. So once we get that CD out, it should be out 3 days prior to closing. Lenders don't have a lot of flexibility on that. So if the lender does not get it out 3 days prior to closing, then that could impact your close date. And then we have closing and doc prep. And we're waiting for documents to get to the title company. Normally it's there somewhere in that 3 day period when docs gets title. So any questions on that? All right, cool. All right, mortgage fraud. I used to have a little video to watch about mortgage fraud, and it's really just to say like, hey, bottom line, if you have any inclination that there is fraud happening on your file, you need to let me know. Like, just let me know, tell me something about it, because it is not a risk that you want to take, right? Nobody looks that good in orange. Like we don't want to take any chances on it. And it is something that happens. I will tell you, I've been not a part of a lot of transactions, but when I worked in title, we had several. And that was back in the early 2000s when we saw fraud a lot more rampantly. And I was in a lot of trainings with the FBI and that kind of thing, talking about how to get out, like how to make sure that you as a real estate professional were protected. The biggest advice that they always gave was, if you see something, say something. Don't let it go and I just didn't know that was fraud. Like if you just mention it and help bring somebody along with it, it's going to keep you out of orange and make sure that you're okay. And it's hard because sometimes it's clients that really you want to help, but they're doing something that's shady. For example, we had a situation recently where we had a client that wants to buy a home in Dallas, but lives in, I don't know, somewhere not like out of state. And so they're wanting to come in and use a primary occupant loan so that they can get a lower down payment, but they really aren't intending on occupying that property. Well, if we know about that, like we can't assist them with that because we are then complicit in them executing mortgage fraud, right? Because the mortgage company only offers those low down payment options for people who are moving into that house that need it for the housing. They'll still extend them a loan. They just want it to be an investor loan and do a more reasonable amount down, right? And so it's that kind of stuff that it seems kind of innocuous. It's like, oh, who's going to find out? Nobody's going to know, but somebody could. And it's really just, it's just not worth it to get a commission on it. So anything like that that you see, just report it and we'll help you get past it and out of it. Any questions on any of that? Okay. Escrow account. So y'all probably all are good on escrow account. It's just really wanting to make sure that if a client has a question about an escrow account, that we can help them get their question answered. If you're ever uncomfortable explaining what an escrow account is, don't feel bad about pushing this onto your loan officer to have them explain what an escrow account is to a client, because they are doing it all day, every day. And we aren't talking about escrow account all that much. What I really want clients to understand is that an escrow account is their money. It's a savings account. So escrow sounds like a scary name for it. And it's unfortunate that we call it that, because it really is just a forced savings account for your taxes and insurance, right? So helping them understand, like, you're putting money into your escrow account because it's like putting in a starting balance into your savings account. And then every month your balance is building up so that you can pay for those big expenses, just like a regular savings account. And then when you go to sell the house, you'll get back what's in there. So it's not a scary thing. It's no big deal. It's just what most people are doing, because it's going to give you the option to really get the best rate possible for your mortgage, because you're not asking for an escrow waiver. People can get out of paying an escrow account and ask for an escrow waiver, but there normally is an escrow waiver fee that results in a higher interest rate on the loan if they don't want to have an escrow account, because it just adds a little bit of risk to the lender for what if somebody doesn't save the money for their taxes and insurance and then they owe it, right? So it's something that, again, it's just part of it. It's not that big a deal. It's just something that we need to be as prepared as possible for the client to help explain it if it comes around. Property tax values reset at time of purchase. So I get that question a lot, where a client says, oh my gosh, I'm really interested in this property because the taxes are low, right? So they're looking at like a $250,000 house, and they're seeing this one that's, the taxes are $7,500, and this one that the taxes are only $5,000. And they think like, oh, this is like, I cheated the system. I just won. My taxes are only going to be $5,000 next year. Well, the reality is that's not what's going to happen, because in Tarrant County, by and large anyway, and really across the Metroplex, the appraisal district, when a property sells, it's flagged in their system. And so they're going to reset the value at that point. Now, Texas is a non-disclosure state. And so in theory, they don't have access to exactly what was paid for that property. So they can't just carte blanche raise it to what they paid for it. However, they can see how much the loan was on the property. And so they can take that loan and say, okay, the property was listed for this, the loan was this, that's exactly 20%, or that's exactly 80% of what it was listed for. So likely it sold for that. That's what we're going to tag our value on, right? So they're going to be creative and figure out that number, or that's what they say they're doing anyway. There's some thought maybe they're actually somehow like figuring out what the price is, but really there isn't another way other than them hacking in to see what the house sold for. So that is the thought, but that is all public record. The loan amount is of public record. What it was listed for is of public record. And so it is fairly easy for the mortgage or for the tax appraisal district to figure out what was paid. And then they're going to tag that value for the next year for the homeowner. Does anybody have any questions on that? So it should mean where everything will be, if it's supposed to be 7,500, every house that you see at 25,000 would be at 7,500, whatever those numbers are. So when I have clients talk about it, I'm like, you know what, you just take that kind of off the table, because every property that we're going to see is going to be right around the same amount. Now there is some difference in tax rates. Mansfield ISD is a little bit higher than Arlington ISD, is a little bit higher, but ultimately it's not that much higher. I mean, you're just, and I'll run numbers for clients and be like, okay, yeah, I mean, you're right. It is $400 a year, and that is not insignificant. However, in the grand scheme of things, it really is not impacting your payment all that much. So anyway, just things to talk about. Property taxes in Texas. So normally the way the timeline goes with the appraisal districts is that values are assessed by the appraisal district somewhere between February and April. And then you get a notice from the appraisal district in like May, June, or July that says, hey, we went out and assessed your value and it's actually this for this year. Okay. And then they give you an opportunity to, what's it called? Rebut it? No, wait.
For what?
When you challenge the appraised value with the appraisal district.
Oh,
Dispute.
Dispute. Thank you. Good one. Yeah. Dispute. Sorry. I'm like, my brain is fried already. So you have this like time period that you can dispute it. And so during that time period, we get a lot of calls from clients of like, hey, you need to help me fight my value. Like it's too high. And so I normally get it. And I'm like, well, actually, this is the value of your house. I'm sorry. Like there's just not a lot I can do about it because they are taxing you appropriately based on the current value of your house. So there are ways that people can go in and do an online dispute and all these things. And so ultimately, you know, we can get into that some, but we are not licensed to go and really fight taxes for people. Really, we can just provide comps just like we would do for anybody that is coming to list their house or something like that and just see if it works for them. So then the taxes go hard basically after that dispute period and after the jurisdictions set their tax rates in October. And then from there, the taxes are officially due and payable. So if you have any closings from October through the end of the year, the current year taxes will be paid. If it's prior to October in the current year, then you'll have a prorated tax amount. And y'all already know a lot about that, about all this other, but that's just kind of how that goes and we'll be going forward. Any questions on taxes? The other thing I'll say real quick about taxes is watch out for over 65 or new construction. Because sometimes when a buyer's escrow account is set up, they set it up on the low taxes. So they set it up on either unimproved taxes where it's way lower than what it should be, or from over 65 position where they are paying lower than they should be. And then they have a major payment shock when the taxes catch up with them. Most of the lenders right now will modify it to be a more appropriate amount. Just make sure you're watching that if you see that taxes were really low on the property to start. Cool. All right. First payment. I always talk about first payment, especially with people that are moving out of a rental into a mortgage, of helping them understand that they have some options to have some payment relief basically on the front end of the loan so that they can pay for things like moving expenses, maybe help repay their savings from their down payment, something like that. So I could talk to a prospective buyer yesterday that she's in an apartment right now. She wants to go and make an offer on a house. And so we talked about making an offer on a house to close 4/1. If she closes 4/1, then her first payment won't be until 6/1 because you always skip the first payment. Okay, so she would close on 4/1, skip the 5/1 payment, and have her first payment 6/1. If she were to have a 30-day close instead of kind of that like closer to 40-day close, and we closed on 3/23, then her first payment would be 5/1 because she would skip the 4/1 payment, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're staying in the house, like you get a bunch of bonus days. You're paying more interest at closing, but it's interest only for that first month, basically. So you're not paying any principal, you're just paying interest. So all that to say is it doesn't mean a whole lot to a lot of people, but it can help, especially with somebody who's moving out of a rental, to say, hey, look, you're not going to have to make double payments. So like this person that I was talking to yesterday, her lease is not up until June 15th or something like that. So she was going to have to make a rent payment 4/1, 5/1, and then part of June or something. And so I was saying, well, hey, here's the good news is if we were able to secure a close date of 4/1, you would only have a double payment for that half a month of June. And so let's go ahead and start looking for something now rather than delaying the search until later. Okay. So that can help sometimes too. Any questions on that? Cool. Okay. This section is ways to pay. And so I want to go through all of the different options of what to pay for and what to look at from a buyer agent perspective of how to prepare your client and how for you to make sure you're as protected as possible with these people too. So first off, cash is my favorite. Like if I could pick any buyer in the world, I want cash. So cash is awesome because of all the things that you know, right? I mean, it just really is such an easy way to buy. Like it makes you think like, oh my gosh, like I don't have to mess with appraisal. I don't have to do really any, I mean, like it is really totally like can close in a day type of situation. So what normally, if we are making cash offers, we need to have a proof of funds letter from their bank to say, hey, I have, you know, if we're making $150,000 offer, hey, I have $150,000 in this bank and it's signed by a bank official on bank letterhead. So it can either be that, or it can be a copy of a recent statement with their name on it and what the balance is. I will usually redact the account numbers on there, but it does need to have their full name and what the balance is on there at what bank that it's there. Okay, so I'll take either one of those, proof of funds letter or a bank statement. And I require that before we ever go and look at properties. You know, ultimately, I don't want to run around town and show people properties if they're not qualified. And so this is the exact same as a pre-qual letter. Just like I don't want to go and show people until they get pre-qualified. It's the same thing on cash. I don't want to show you until you get me that. And so it may, like if a cash person gets real up in arms about it, that to me is a huge red flag of like, maybe they don't really have the cash, because it shouldn't be a big deal for them to go ahead and send this over to you. Okay. On cash with a cash buyer, there is no appraisal part of this, right? Because the lender is the one who would do the appraisal. Well, so if they want an appraisal, then I tell the buyer, you really need to be prepared to order an independent appraisal and have it completed during our option period. Okay. We don't need to write anything into special provisions about getting an appraisal. We don't need to have an appraisal form or anything like that attached to the contract. Just have an option period long enough to accommodate an appraisal. Even though an appraisal, when you order it from the bank, takes a couple of weeks, normally if you're actually paying cash for an appraisal, they'll get it done within a week. So normally it's not that big a deal to go ahead and get that done. Has anybody dealt with that? Or any issues with that? I'll tell you, I don't love appraisal on a cash deal. And so I really encourage my cash buyers to not jack with it, because to me, it's just additional money that you're putting out that really doesn't mean anything. I mean, let's think about what an appraisal is, right? It's some dude's opinion of what the market has done over the last 6 months and showing us what the comps are. I can get you that. I mean, I get that it's not stamped with an appraisal on it, but to me, why spend another $400? It gives you nothing. I mean, it doesn't give you anything. And there's no guarantee that the seller is going to lower the price based on what the appraisal comes in at. So I just don't think it's a whole lot of value. They don't have to order a title policy either, or even close at a title company. Most of the time they will get both of those, go ahead and close at a title policy and with a title company. And so the title company will handle the deed prep and all of that. And they'll also pull the title work. And so normally that's going to take about a week to get everything in, but cash deals shouldn't be like on a 30-day cycle. They should be on more of a 10 or 15-day cycle at most. Survey is also not required, but if they want one, they can get one too. Any questions about cash?
Only thing I dealt with my cash deal was we had said no appraisal. Just I put that in their letter just because some people don't acknowledge that, and they still were wanting a waiver. And I explained to them, I go, this is cash. There is no waiver. I go, look at the waiver. The waiver is for third-party addendum or third-party financing, excuse me. And they just were like, oh, it still has to be there. I've had this come back to bite me. And I was like, I don't understand it. We ended up getting out of that whole deal. It was a major mess, but I don't know if anybody else has dealt with that. I don't, I didn't understand. I still never could figure out what they were talking about.
We run into that occasionally where the agent doesn't really understand or read the forms. And so then they are asking for things that are just not appropriate on there. Like we had one last week where they insisted that we put the piano in as an exclusion on page 1. And I'm like, but it's it's not a part of page 1. Like it's not, it's clearly, personal property. It's not part of the contract at all. And so it's really inappropriate to put it on page 1, but they just like would not sign unless we put piano on there. And so like, okay. Yeah. So sometimes, and I think that's what we ended up doing on Brady's deal too. Like we just kind of like, okay, we think this is ineffectual, but like we'll put it in or we'll talk, it's tough when another agent doesn't represent well on the other side, but we'll just fight through it. So good. All right, so that's cash. Let's talk about conventional. So conventional is what we will see most loans coming through now. It is the preferred loan program out there as of 2021. The changes over time. So it used to be that FHA was our preferred, so it modifies. But in this market, conventional is the right way to go. So most lenders are going to be doing everything they can to get the client to qualify for conventional. The only reason why somebody wouldn't qualify for conventional is usually that their credit is so low that they don't have a conventional product to put them in. And so that's when they will push them down to an FHA product. There are a few other reasons why FHA makes sense for some clients instead of conventional. It's pretty few. So that means when I as a listing agent get an offer that is FHA, I mean, I'm kind of holding it up like this, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, like how bad is this client? Because if they can't qualify for conventional, and I know that sounds like rough and like sad and mean and all that, but it's the reality of it is that everyone is trying to go conventional right now. Why? Because even if they're putting down less than 20%, their mortgage insurance will end once they get to a 20% down position. Okay. So, once they get to a 78% down position. So if I go and pay, let's say 5% down, and then I pay for a few years, and then now I'm at a 78%, the mortgage insurance will fall off automatically, and then I'll have the rest of my 30 years to pay out. On FHA, I will pay that mortgage insurance every month for the whole 30 years. Now, the reality is, how many people keep a loan for 30 years? Like pretty much nobody. So it's not as bad as it seems for a consumer to have to go FHA. It just still is a more expensive way to do it. And so that's why the lenders are really trying to help consumers go with a conventional product. Does anybody have any questions on that or issues? So conventional is pretty much, it's pretty vanilla. It's not that big a deal. The fees on it are relatively simple to understand. If you have any, and pretty much every lender can do about the same stuff on it. So if you have any questions or have any concerns about it, really go to any lender and they'll be able to talk you through it. FHA. So FHA is a little more complex. We've got two versions of FHA. Regular is the 203B, and then with repairs is a 203K. Repairs would be like an HVAC doesn't work or the foundation needs to get fixed. It's normally more than just the countertops are not my favorite color, those kind of things. It's, hey, this house is not able to be sold unless these repairs are done. And so it's a harder process to get through with 203K, as you can imagine, with the repairs, but it's not impossible. If you're looking for a resource on that, Joy Bates with Cross Country Mortgage has been my best resource for doing 203K on here. So on FHA, you have not only the mortgage insurance that you pay every month for the whole 30 years, but you also pay an upfront. And so it's an upfront amount of 1.75, pretty heavy. And then every month you pay mortgage insurance as well. And it doesn't matter if you put 20% down or not. So every time on FHA, people are only going to put the 3.5% down unless there's some reason why they cannot qualify with the 3.5% down. FHA has gotten to be unpopular too because the appraisal sticks to the property for 120 days. It's not that big a deal anymore because the likelihood of getting another FHA buyer is probably not that high, but It's just a little different than conventional. Conventional doesn't have a tracking method for appraisal. So if I were to go to Mike Mills, let's say, and get an appraisal and I didn't like it, I could terminate the loan with Mike and go to Mike Walkenhorst and get another appraisal, and it would be completely independent of the one that was out here. But on FHA, that's not the case. They have an FHA case number, and so those are all tied to the property and stuck on the property for 120 days. Good. It's not good, but it is what it is. That's FHA. VA. So VA is the only other one that people are using other than conventional right now, is they are really trying to push VA when a veteran is able. And so this is only for veterans that have service. They do get a 0% down option, which is great for a lot of people. However, we also want to make sure they understand they are at some risk if they need to make a move quickly, that they will have been, they didn't put anything down. And so if they needed to move, they may have to come up with cash in order to sell the house. It's not as likely a scenario right now with the higher equity build and the market moving where it is. But in the past, this has been a really big issue for us with VA, and it just hurt my heart to see somebody going in with no down and then them need to make a move. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't, like, you're underwater on it. So it's a good news, bad news thing on the VA's 0% down. VA has their own appraisers, and they are known for the tightest requirements. They are very tough. So it is not the same as a conventional appraisal. VA really is doing that to protect the veteran, is their MO there. And so they want to make sure that there are, that it is a good house in the neighborhood. So they are checking for things like broken windows, and they want to make sure that the house is more, really safe, sound, and secure, that there's not a major foundation issue, that there's not any sort of wood rot or peeling paint. They're very sensitive to wood rot. I don't know why. But so y'all, like, if the termite, the wood destroying insect report shows that there's any even conducive conditions for wood destroying insects, they are going to require that to be remedied before closing. And so that could be brush that's too close to the house. Like, so the bush doesn't have 2 inches of clearance between the siding and the bush. They're going to require that be trimmed down. I've seen them have to take down sheds that are too close to the house, some fencing. I mean, like, weird stuff, y'all, that would not ever have been caught on a conventional deal, sometimes get popped on a VA deal. So just know you may have to work through that on that. Has anybody had anything weird like that? It's not the end of the world. It's just working through it. But I will tell you, that is why, if you're in a competitive offer situation, that VA offer is probably not going to be seen as competitive as a conventional offer, or definitely as a cash offer, right? Because you're going to have to go through this pretty tight appraisal. And if they're putting 0 down, do they really have cash to put down above an appraisal? Those kind of things. That's the other thing too, is that addendum for termination due to or concerning lender's appraisal or whatever, that form is only for conventional. It's not for FHA or VA, because FHA and VA, being government loans, say that the borrower cannot commit to paying over appraisal from the very beginning. They can make a choice. If the appraisal comes back low, they can choose to pay that difference, but they can't say from the very beginning, hey, I'm willing to pay $10,000 over. Okay. So you can't use that form. You can't write anything into special revisions, because that is part of VA. Like, they won't allow that, which makes your offer even less competitive, right? It's tough. So the good news on VA is that there is no mortgage insurance, but there is an upfront VA funding fee. And that's what this chart shows, is that if they have no down payment the first time they use it, it's a funding fee of 2.15%. And so they would get a loan for 102.15. Okay. Instead of 100% loan, they get a 102.15. If they've done VA loans in the past, then they get a loan for 103.3. So does that kind of make sense on that side? So this funding fee, it's the same as mortgage insurance. It's just through VA. However, there is a way to get out of jail free on that part. And it's if there is a 10% or more service-connected disability. Your lender should be talking with the veteran borrower about this, but this is also something that you could talk to them about too, just to show some value and show that you kind of know what you're doing on VA. So somebody who has a service-connected disability, it's not always that they lost, their eyesight or something like that. It's that they could have had some hearing loss that you can't tell, that it's not like they have even hearing aids or something, but per VA, they are now service-connected disabled because they served in Afghanistan or something like that. They could have PTSD, and that's considered a service-connected disability. So we don't know from looking at them. And so after I thank them for their service, I do ask them, I'm like, hey, is there by any chance any service-connected disability that you have? Because if you do, you can get out of paying that additional VA funding fee completely. And so that's going to save you a good amount of money. And so we may need to see, like, I've got actually some clients right now that are in a rent house because he's still waiting on his service-connected disability to go active after his retirement from the military. And he needed some time to get it to set, but it was going to be so much money that they were like, you know what, we're just going to rent for 6 months until we get that, so that we make sure that we're okay, so that we make sure we get that waived. Okay, so it is something that is pretty germane to the conversation. Any questions on any of that? All right. Texas Veterans Land Board. If you've got a vet that wants to buy land, then this can be a really cool resource. You have something, Brady? Oh, okay. I was going to answer. But this can be really good. Is normally the VA is better if they're just buying a house. You can buy a house through Texas Veteran Land Board too, but normally VA is better for that. USDA, so we talked about this a little bit at Go Getters this morning. USDA is an option for rural properties, and it is a zero down option as well, but the property has to qualify and the borrower has to income qualify. So it can't just be anybody go get a USDA loan, but if they qualify for it, it's an awesome product. It's really a kind of antiquated product that was out there to help farmers. USDA, right? And so that's why it's only rural, but it's weird the way that they have the rural designations. It's not just things outside of the area. Like for a long time, Crowley still qualified because of the ratio of how many families were in Crowley and all this stuff. So there are still areas within the Metroplex even that qualify for USDA. There's going to be less and less, but especially if you get out a little bit into maybe Rendon, Midlow, farther out, you may see some properties that qualify for that. Just talk with your lender too, and they can do that. But this is that website that I was saying that where you can go and check the property. And I just normally just Google USDA property search, and then you can put in the actual physical address of the property. All right. Local banks. So sometimes we need relationships with local banks too, to do things like land loans, construction loans, sometimes investment property, or just unique properties or situations. So we see this a lot of times, like, let's say that, somebody wants to buy 50 acres in Maybank or something, and they don't, that doesn't really fit in a mortgage product. And you may go to like if you're a Chase Bank customer and you walk into Chase Bank and say, hey, I'd like to buy 50 acres in Maybank, they may look at you like you're crazy and they don't really know how to help with that. Versus if you walk into First National Bank of Gun Barrel City right next to Maybank, they're like, oh, sure, let's go ahead and do a loan for that. So like, it just depends what you need as what that local bank situation is. So if you've got somebody that's doing construction or doing something that's different, a lot of times those local banks can help. And so I'm always trying to make relationships with local bankers just so that way I can have some resources to do. So, feel free to call me anytime, but you should be doing that too, creating those relationships. If you're dealing with a property specific in that area, go ahead and go to a bank that is local to that area too. And that may help kind of make the whole situation go faster and easier. Other financing. So we hear clients a lot of times asking about owner finance. There are some owner finance deals out there. I actually just got a deal in Sky Slope yesterday that somebody had negotiated an owner finance deal on some land. Great. I'm totally good with that. But what interest rate was it at? 3? No. So it's at 6, right? So, you would expect to see on an owner finance deal an interest rate far above what market rate is. So if your client is somebody who needs that, hey, that's okay. There are some options out there, and you can search for that on MLS. I don't mind helping with owner finance. I don't help with lease purchase. It's just my thing. Here's why. So when a client comes to you and says, "Hey, I need a lease purchase. I want to set down roots, but I can't buy right now, but I want to get my kids in this school district and I want them to like be, forever in this house and create all these memories, whatever." I don't know. I don't love it because I am really helping them get a lease, right? And it's not that I don't want to help them get a lease, but I'm going to do a whole lot of work for really just getting a lease commission, not a sale commission, because it's not going to even be as easy as me just finding a lease, because I'm going to have to filter through and call all these people and say, "Hey, would you consider a lease purchase?" and all this stuff. And then in theory, when that tenant buys that house, I would get the commission, 3% or whatever we negotiate commission on that. But how many people actually purchase that lease purchase house that they get into, right? Not a whole lot. They have high hopes of that they just need a few months to get that divorce done, or they just need a little bit of time to get that credit fixed, or they just need whatever. But ultimately, I mean, y'all, I've seen it happen so many times where people run these clients all over town. They do all this work and they get paid as a lease, but they just never pan out to actually get paid as a purchase. And so if you're fine with representing them from a lease perspective, totally cool. But if you're too busy and not willing to represent them on a lease, then don't think that the money is just going to fall into your lap and be like what we were talking about with new construction, where it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm planning on getting that 3% in a little bit," because it's less likely to actually be real. Hard money. So hard money is kind of like an owner finance deal. You're going to pay a much higher rate of interest, but it's not something that the owner is only owner financing that one property. It's where you can kind of pick whatever property you want to. And so there are lots of options on that. You do get paid on those. I mean, because they're just purchasing with a less than favorable interest rate. It's not fraud. Like everybody is going in it with eyes open. It's fine if they want to do that. It's tough for the consumer, and it does potentially put them in a worse situation. Reverse mortgage. So reverse mortgage is for clients age 62 or over. And it's a very unique product. And it basically is saying that instead of having a mortgage where you make a payment every month and your mortgage balance goes down every month, your mortgage balance goes up. So you get a mortgage for, let's say, half of the value of the house you're purchasing. And then every month, instead of making a payment, you don't make a payment, but your balance that you owe goes up just a little bit every month. And so when you or your heirs go to sell that house, then you'll pay off whatever you owe to the bank at that point, and you get whatever equity is still left in the house. And if there is no equity left in the house, then you don't owe anything more. Okay, so it can work for some people. It does not work for everybody. I don't love it because a lot of times people use it to market a nicer, bigger house for clients. So, they're like, "Oh, you could take your $200,000 in cash and turn this into a $400,000 purchase, and look at how like awesome your life is." And to me, that feels oogie, like it really is stealing from heirs and that kind of thing. But if maybe they don't have any heirs, or maybe their heirs don't need the money or whatever, it can work. I had one I guess it was during soccer season. So, I mean, within the last couple of months, that it really did work for the client. And it was actually one of my best friend's parents. Like, I have known them my whole life. Like, I would have never put a client into a reverse mortgage unless I felt like they really needed it. They really needed it. They are not in a very, high-end home. And I couldn't find them something less to go into to really meet their budget. And so this helped them stay in their home. So they just did a refi. We didn't do a purchase, but you can do it either way. But it helped them stay in their home and helped us not be in a position where I was moving them out of a fairly nice home into a really crappy house, right? I mean, because their budget was not a lot. And so this allowed them to use the equity that is in their house to stay in their house. And they have one kid. She does really well. She doesn't need the money. Like, there wasn't a plan for that equity to be needed down the road too. So anyway, sometimes it works. And so for that, I just got them with a specific reverse mortgage person. So it is a niche. And so just like hard money or something, it's not the same as like going to Mike Mills. You basically go out, source some referrals, and then get them with that one person. Okay. Down payment assistance. So y'all might have heard me say this before. Down payment assistance is tough because you are going to the lender and saying, hey, lender, I am good for that loan. I can make those payments. I am a great credit risk. Like, you should definitely make me that loan for, $200,000. But then you're also raising your hand and saying, hey, but Mr. Lender, I'm not financially responsible enough or don't make enough money where I could actually save enough for a down payment. So I need you to pay that for me. Right. And so it's kind of awkward, right, to hold up both of those hands. And so it does work for some people, but it's a relatively thin margin of the population of somebody who makes enough that they can qualify for the house, but that doesn't make so much that it's reasonable to think that they couldn't save that money for their down payment. So it does happen some, but it's not something where just everybody gets it. And so I always push that off onto the lender and say, hey, you just need to call the lender and talk with him about that. He is going to walk you through all the options and see if there's anything available. 90% of the time, there's not going to be anything available, but then I'm not as the bad guy. I kind of push that over to them, right? So anyway, that's down payment assistance. I-10 loans are things that are loans that are set up for non-US citizens. So if you are a non-resident alien, I guess, so somebody who is in the US but not a citizen, they can choose to get what's called an I-10, and it's kind of a pre-Social Security number. They pay taxes on that. So they file a tax return and they like have a job and they pay taxes. And so they're kind of showing the government, right, of, hey, I want to be a part of this system. And so then they're more likely to gain citizenship and that kind of thing. It's kind of on the path of citizenship. And so some lenders will lend on an I-10 because they are showing, hey, I am trying to get there, and they have some way to prove what income they're making. They have some way to prove what job they have and those kind of things, versus just somebody who has no Social Security number at all. Like, they are not going to be able to get a loan, really hard money, anything, because that lender doesn't want to take a risk on kind of a ghost type person that's here, right? Even if they are making good money as a cleaning lady or doing something, if they're not paying taxes, they really can't participate in getting a mortgage on it. Okay. So anyway, but I-10 loans are out there, and that is a legit way to go about it. Like, that's no issue on any of that. So, okay. We made it through all the way through lending. What questions y'all have? Anything that we want to talk about?
Amy?
Yeah.
Going back to the VA, is it difference between buying a single family as opposed to a multifamily? I know that they're allowed up to 4 units, maybe a duplex or something, but how is that treated differently when they are going to involve renting to them to provide, different rates and how much protection and stuff?
Yeah. So, and you were cutting out a little bit, so let me make sure so you're asking, like, what's the difference between buying on like a duplex, triplex, quadplex versus just a single family?
Correct.
Yeah. So rates should be relatively the same all the way through. And it can be a really cool option for people to build equity and wealth, because, so let's say that you find a 4plex. I, as a consumer, go in and say, I am going to own or occupy this property. Well, it's assumed that I'm only going to own or occupy 1/4 of that. And so I totally can, go ahead and use those other 3 as sources of income if they already are leased. And if they aren't already leased, like, I'm able to get the best financing terms on it. I'm not getting that investor loan like we were talking about on the fraud thing. Like, I'm getting the owner occupant rate on the whole building. They don't do it just as like 25% at this rate and then the rest of it at an investor rate. It's the whole thing gets tagged as an owner occupant side. Also, the cool thing about that is that I do have to move in. I mean, if I'm going to do that and get those owner occupant rates, I have to be willing to move in. But if I stay there, like, let's say a year or a year and a half or 2 years, and then I decide to move into another property, whether it's another 4plex or another whatever, I met kind of the letter of the law of being, the intentionality was, I moved into that property as my primary residence. I met that intention. I did that. But now I can freely move. There's not a timeline a lot of times on that. In fact, I haven't seen a timeline in a long time. So as long as I met that intention, I moved in initially, then I can go in and move into another property and I don't have any sort of issues with that. So like Spencer and I, for our very first house, we bought our first house and then we kept it as a rental, but moved into another house. We have never refinanced that house. So our loan is still a primary and like a primary homestead loan on that house, even though we moved out of it 10 years ago, right? So that's a way that a lot of people build wealth, because they can go and like daisy chain those together. I think it's a really cool option for a lot of people, and that we should be talking to more people about. Good question. What I think we run into, and what I would love to see more of, is more of those being constructed so that more people could take advantage of that. You know, we just don't see that many duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes around. And so it's tough. And a lot of them have gotten separated where it's a half duplex. Well, that doesn't do the same thing. You got to have the whole duplex together in order to make that work. Yeah, good question. Any other questions or things about financing, repping buyers? All right, we'll keep fighting the good fight, y'all. And we'll go ahead and close down nuts and bolts today. But if you think of anything or have any questions on anything, let me know. And we'll start next week with actually getting into the search and how to really help find the best properties out there for our clients. So we will talk soon. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.